all people who experience homelessness street involved?
Yeah, that's a good question. That's an interesting one. I think, yeah, street involved is sort of one of those, at least in my kind of opinion or experience of the term, is sort of one of those kind of vague concepts that we use. And so I think sometimes it's used in that kind of broad way to say, you kind of use it as a shorthand for someone with a history of homelessness or someone who's experiencing homelessness. We might say they're kind of street involved. But I think if we were to kind of get more technical or get more narrow, it is probably useful to think about how not all young people are sort of involved with the street, right? So, certainly there's a lot of young people who are part of that kind of hidden homeless. So this is the idea that there's young people who don't ever sort of come in contact with an emergency shelter or an emergency drop-in, right? They just kind of couch surf or bounce between families' places, and things like that. And so they're never kind of officially counted or never kind of come into the official system. So, yeah, and so they kind of remain hidden in this way. And so certainly, we might not count or sort of consider those folks to be, street involved exactly. So for me, street involved kind of, if we're being more narrow about it, does sort of refer to people who might be, for example, sleeping rough, right? So that would be kind of sleeping in an abandoned building or sleeping outside or sleeping in an encampment, sleeping in a car, those kinds of things. I think we would sort of think of them, sleeping rough folks, as being street involved. And then I would probably also add in there young people who are maybe connected to, who are part of, maybe connected to an emergency shelter or something like that, but are sort of a part of, are part of the kind of the wider social world that kind of surrounds that shelter. Like, I think that's one of the things to recognize, is that there is this whole social world that's kind of surrounds the shelter and the drop-in, and then the kind of the areas around the shelter and the drop-in or the services where young people might congregate when they can't be at those places. And there is a whole kind of social world and a network that young people can form, and it can be really supportive, but it can also be kind of a source of risk as well for them. And so certainly I think when young people, for me, when I think of street involved, I'm also thinking of young people who are kind of connected to that network. And so for that reason, you might have a young person who has moved home, or maybe gotten a place temporarily, just like you were sort of mentioning, Nicole, and has a place, but they're still sort of that network and are still sort of connected to that network, and then the complexities that can come with that network. So I would sort of also consider them street involved, even though they're maybe kind of on their way away from the street, they can still have that connection.
Mm-hmm.